Season 2 of the hit show Invincible is well underway, with part 2 of the season starting back up last week. There's been a lot of discussion online about how fans think this season will end and what events from the comics this season will cover. So I wanted to get ahead of the curve and put my prediction out there before this next episode comes out. Just a heads up, there will be major spoilers for the show discussed, so only watch this if you have read the comic series or if you don't care about spoilers. Okay, I'll just cut right to the chase. I personally believe the finale for this season is going to be the fight between Cecil and Mark. There's a very popular opinion online of what many fans believe the finale will be, and it's not this, but we'll come back to that later. I believe this will be the finale for a few pretty strong reasons that I'll try to summarize as best I can. I believe it works very well as a finale, thematically and storytelling-wise. I believe it works well for the timeline of events from the comics, and I believe it all around just makes the most sense. Okay, it will be difficult to be concise when explaining themes and storytelling stuff, but I'll do the best I can. So television is a different medium than comic books. I know, duh. But different mediums require different deliveries of stories. While television shows like Invincible aim to tell one large overarching story, they also aim to tell stories in each episode and each season. The comic book series like Invincible has one very large overarching and many smaller stories and arcs throughout, but it's kind of all just one ongoing story told in individual issues for the most part. The concept of a season throws a little bit of a wrench into the way they have to adapt the story. They have to make the story fit the medium and tell one story over the season in one way or another. They did an excellent job with adapting and fitting the medium well in Season 1, and they've done an excellent job so far in Season 2. Just have to throw that out there. But usually in a serialized TV show like this, you see themes and arcs established early in the season that are fleshed out throughout the season and then have some kind of conclusion by the end of the season. These themes and arcs don't have to be exclusive to just one season. And oftentimes there is a lot of carryover stuff from season to season, but usually there's some level of containment with themes and character arcs for one season. That's just the nature of the medium. Again, there are definitely outliers, but I'm just talking in generalities about the medium of television. For example, while Season 2 of Marvel's Loki is a continuation of the first season, it also has themes and character arcs specific to just that season. Loki's arc in Season 1 is different from that of Season 2, even though there's carryover from Season 1. There are different themes explored in Season 2 than there are in Season 1, etc., etc. You get the point. Now, to bring it back to Invincible and this season's finale, I believe this season's finale will be the fight between Mark and Cecil because it serves as an excellent conclusion to the character arcs and themes set up and explored in this season. In my opinion, the theme of Season 2 of Invincible has been extremely obvious. Mark does not want to be like his dad. He even explicitly says this several times throughout the season, and it is the motivation for his actions throughout the season. He's afraid of being like his dad and wants to prove he's not like his dad. It's even in a lot of the promotional material, like the official poster for the season that features his dad in his reflection. There are certainly other themes explored throughout the season, but I believe this is the main and strongest theme of the season, not only for Mark, but for Cecil as well. How many times this season have Mark and Cecil had a conversation where a comparison to Nolan is brought up? Almost every episode. In the first episode, Cecil doesn't think Mark's ready to go back out there because he doesn't want him to turn out like his dad. Mark wants to prove he's not like his dad. That's why he eventually goes back out there. Second episode, Mark turns back to fight the deep-sea dweller, and Cecil mentions he's not his dad. Third episode, Cecil mentions his dad while Mark is leaving the planet. Fourth episode, they don't interact. Fifth episode, his dad's only mentioned in reference to his brother, but the tensions are still high between them when they interact. Cecil very much does not want Mark to be like his dad. He wants to control the situation to make sure that Mark doesn't become like his dad, and Cecil is a character who will go to extremes to get the outcome he deems best. Mark very much doesn't want to be like his dad. He wants to control how he acts and reacts to things to show people and demonstrate that he's not like his dad. They both want control over Mark's destiny. They've shown us in several instances that Mark doesn't like the idea of following orders, and he's a bit brash with his judgment. They've also shown us in several instances that Cecil doesn't like Mark not following orders and that he's not afraid to cross some lines. So what happens when Mark brashly judges Cecil's crossing of lines? The conflict between Mark and Cecil has been heavily set up this season. They both have strong themes that are in relation but opposition to each other. That's been established. But how about some concrete events that they've set up this season that lead to the fight between them in the comics? In this season, they show us that Cecil wants to have the frequency that hurts Mark recreated. This is a big one. They don't show us the origins of that frequency in the comics. It's something that Cecil just has. Showing us that Cecil discovered it and wants to weaponize it is definitely an intentional choice by the show. They show us another random encounter with Doc Seismic to make sure we know Doc is in jail now. This is important because Doc breaking out of jail starts the chain of events that leads to the fight with Cecil. They show us Mark putting new Darkwing away, and not only that, but they also add in a little comparison to Nolan. because why not make it more apparent? This is important because the new Dark Queen also plays a role in starting the fight between Mark and Cecil. They also spend a lot of time on Donald this season, which is almost all brand new content for the show. They focus on how far Cecil is willing to go to get the results he wants and what line Cecil is willing to cross, and it's all new just for this season of the show. Now, why would they include all of these events in this season in addition to the heavy themes and tension between Mark and Cecil if they weren't going to deliver a payoff to the setups? Could they be in a later season? Sure. But like we were talking about earlier with the medium of television, it doesn't make much sense to have such heavy themes and arcs explored for a whole season just for there to not be a conclusion to them in some way in that season. We've got all the cards in place for the setup of this battle, so why would they put the payoff in a different season? It just makes the most sense from a storytelling perspective to have a conclusion that caters to the themes and arcs set up in that season. Now, if you're not sure how their fight would serve as a conclusion to these themes and arcs, I'll explain why I think it would. I believe the fight between Mark and Cecil will serve as a parallel of the fight between Cecil and Nolan in Season 1. It'll put Mark in the same position his dad was in. It will make it so that Mark is his dad according to Cecil and the audience, except this time we'll be seeing it from the other side. We'll see that maybe Cecil isn't the best guy and that Mark isn't actually like his dad, for one, and for two, maybe it wouldn't be a bad thing if he was, because maybe he wasn't the bad guy when we saw him in this scenario. Obviously he was, but it will make the audience, Mark and Debbie and other characters, see the events between Nolan and Cecil a little differently, especially after Mark and the audience saw that maybe Nolan isn't necessarily a bad guy when we checked in on him on Thraxa. Putting Mark in an identical situation to one his dad was in serves as a great thematic conclusion because the theme of him not wanting to be his dad will have come to a head. Now he's in the spot his dad was in. How does he react, and how does Cecil react to that? Obviously, it's not a concrete conclusion, and both characters will go forward after this, but it serves as an excellent television season conclusion to the arcs and themes set up and explored in this season. Having the finale play out like this gives us a payoff of several things that have been set up and built up over the whole season. We get a payoff of the Rhiannon plot, the Darkwing plot, the Donald plot, the frequency thing, and even Mark's setup. Get to that later. It can serve as a conclusion to Debbie's arc this season. Seeing her son turn into a villain when she knows he isn't would start a questioning in her that may lead to looking at Nolan differently. It also just involves almost all the characters in the show, which isn't completely necessary, but again, for this medium, it kind of is. It just wouldn't feel as satisfying to have a conclusion that doesn't include any other characters. Now, for the next point. I believe this will be the finale episode because it makes sense timeline-wise. Now, the show moves stuff around with the timeline of events pretty regularly, but never super drastically. In Season 1, they moved the Omni-Man versus Guardians of the Globe fight to the very beginning, but even in Season 2, they've already been playing around with the timeline of events from how they happen in the comics. In the comics, the Angstrom conflict happens pretty soon after Mark returns from Thraxa, and it happens before the Sequid and Lizard League stuff. Anyways, before I get into the specifics of why I think it makes sense timeline-wise, I think I need to explain how I see the next few episodes playing out. So in episode 6, I think we'll see the conclusion to the two cliffhangers they left us with in episode 5. Rex is in the hospital, Kate and Ray get a funeral, Mark goes to visit Amber, and I think he'll catch her with that other dude she dates. I don't know, it's Amber. He checks in with Debbie, and I think Debbie will have taken up Cecil's offer behind Mark's back. I think this will also further build the tension between the two because Mark will see it as Cecil trying to take advantage of the situation, but also his mom can't raise Oliver on her own. So anyways, I think we also will get a visit from Alan in episode 6, and I think that kind of goes hand in hand with the visit from Anissa as well, like we saw in the trailers. Not the really bad visit, just the one where she's like, hey, we're not all bad, but I'm going to kick your ass, and the cruise ship thing. Then I think Mark and Amber will break up very similarly to how they do in the comics. Like Mark just feels really bad for stringing her along and thinks she doesn't deserve it. I don't know specifically how that plays out, but it doesn't really matter. Same with just the order of those events. I just think those things will happen in this episode. And then I think the episode will end with Mark getting a call from Angstrom and rushing home. So then that brings us to episode 7. I think episode 7 is pretty much, the whole episode is going to be the Mark versus Angstrom fight. I think they're going to expand on it quite a bit and make it more brutal and more interesting. I think the B and C stories for this episode will be pretty minimal. Maybe we'll get a check-in on Nolan in the Viltrumite prison. Maybe we'll see Alan getting the idea to get imprisoned by Anissa, because that's how it plays out timeline-wise in the comics. Who knows? But I think, importantly, this episode ends with Mark killing Angstrom. It's the infamous line, "I thought you were stronger." And I'll get back to why I think episode 7 will end with this later. But then episode 8, I think we'll start out with Mark being stranded and scared and conflicted in the alternate universe. And then the future Guardians show up, and future Eve tells Mark she had feelings for him, and Mark needs to act on it, blah, blah, blah. Find out Rudy goes by Rex now. Just kind of plays out almost one-to-one from the comics. Then Mark gets back home. He makes sure his mom and Oliver are okay. He gives a debrief to Cecil, and Cecil is taken aback by Mark killing Angstrom so violently. Then Mark goes to visit Eve in Africa, or at her parents' house, whatever. It doesn't really matter. I just think he's going to go visit her. I think they're going to have their kiss like they do in the comics, and I think it's going to be interrupted by Cecil saying he needs help, just like it does in the comics. Doc Seismic is broken out of prison, and it's gotten really bad. He's captured everyone. Mark and Eve come in. They get captured as well. And then the Reaniman, Darkwing, and robot Donald come in to save the day. And Mark, who is super on edge by everything that's happened in the last 24 hours, just snaps. I think Cecil, who is also super on edge by everything that's happened, snaps in reaction. And I think they fight very much like they do in the comics. Cecil uses the earpiece and teleporter to try to take him down. He uses the Reaniman, all that. I think they'll add on to the fight, though, and make it really parallel Nolan and Cecil in season 1. Maybe in the same settings, or maybe they bring back the Hail Mary kaiju or the satellite laser or something. Who knows? But eventually, Mark makes it back to the Guardians base, and the fight concludes the same way it does in the comics. The Guardians pretty much disband over it. Mark, in recovery, tells Eve why he went to visit her, and it rubs her kind of the wrong way. So he goes to visit Art, who gives him the black suit and gives him kind of a pep talk, and maybe they talk about the books, or maybe that happens earlier. I don't know. The black suit, I think, happens at the end, and I think we'll get a title drop with the blue and black logo, nothing else. And then after the credits, I think we'll get a tease that Angstrom is still alive, is collecting evil Invincibles, and I think that's where that shot from the trailer comes from. So, yeah, that's how I think specifically each episode will play out for the rest of the season. Could go differently, just my prediction, based on stuff we've seen from the trailers and comics and all that. But anyways, so now that you have an idea how I think it'll all play out, let's dive into some of the specific timeline reasons I believe this will play out this way. So first of all, I do not think they will wait until season 3 to set up Mark and Eve's relationship. Mark and Eve's relationship really starts when future Eve visits Mark in the Angstrom dimension. If that doesn't happen until season 3, episode 1, they have a lot of groundwork to do to build their relationship before this dude shows up. Plus, we have a pretty good indication that Amber and Mark are breaking up this season, and I really doubt they're going to leave that completely open-ended at the end of this season as well. Again, they could for sure, but there's not really a good motivation for doing that or delaying the setup between Mark and Eve. So to piggyback off that, I don't think they're delaying the Cecil versus Mark confrontation until season 3 either for that same reason. What motivation do they have to hold off on a conclusion to the tension they've been building all season? Next season, they'll certainly be setting up all new arcs and themes, and sure, some may carry over, but this is a heavy theme this season, so why would they hold it off, especially when season 3 is going to be pretty jam-packed as well. Also, the blue suit. Dude, they've been literally setting this shit up all season long. Everyone agrees on that unanimously. Just tell me, how are they going to give Mark the blue suit before Angstrom if that were to be the finale? Yes, it's possible for him to be like, oh man, I feel like I need to change things up for no reason, but it makes so much more sense for him to get it after parting ways with Cecil. That's what happens in the comics, and it makes sense thematically as well to happen in the show. It's also a great way to set up season 3. Mark is on his own now, he's got a new suit, and he's in a new relationship. Very intriguing to see where things go from here, especially when you leave a tease that the Viltrumite War is building up and that Angstrom is still alive, and, you know, with the Guardians being disbanded and everything. It's an interesting place to start a new season. Timeline-wise, to hold off on the Cecil and Mark fight is not only delaying many payoffs and thematic conclusions for the season, but it's also inadvertently delaying a lot of events that shouldn't really be delayed, and it's delaying them into a season that will already be pretty jam-packed, so it doesn't really make sense why they would do that. So now, to get to the counter-arguments. Most fans online believe that the finale for the season will be the fight between Mark and Angstrom, and I 100% get why people think this will be the finale. There are a lot of valid reasons for believing so, and I just don't really disagree with them or see some arguments against those points. So let's dive into those reasons why people believe it will be the finale, and I'll kind of explain what my problems with those reasons are. So one common argument I see a lot is that they set up Angstrom in the first episode of season 2, so they're going to bring him back in the last episode of season 2. But to that argument, I just want to say, like, why do you think they have to do it that way? Like, there isn't a rule for that. And if you're thinking, well, thematically, it makes sense to bring it full circle or whatever. Sure, I get where you're coming from, but there's way more thematic reasons for it to be Mark versus Cecil. For Mark and Cecil's character arc to be kind of tossed aside and every other character ignored in the finale, just to bring back the dude they set up in the first episode is kind of odd. That's not really a valid reason to think why it would be the finale when there's a lot of reasons why Mark and Cecil would be. Anyways, also, just a smaller point. I don't think that this conflict between Angstrom and Mark is really the big one. Like, yes, it is a big, memorable moment at that point in time in the comics, and the I thought you were stronger moment is going to be viral for sure. The real big conflict between Angstrom and Mark is the Invincible War. This first real battle between them serves as almost more of a setup for that, in my opinion, at least. Anyways, that brings us to another counter argument. So, if you didn't know, the episode title's leaked for Season 2, Part 2, and the title of the finale episode is I Thought You Were Stronger. This was the final nail in the coffin for everyone that thought the finale was going to be anything other than the Angstrom fight. But I'm here to stand up for us, for the people. I'm just kidding. I completely get why seeing that as the finale title makes you go, oh, the finale is definitely going to be Angstrom then, but if you look a little bit deeper, it is actually an instrumental point in proving why it won't be the finale episode. So here's why. So Season 2, Episode 3, the last line of the episode is, "It's been a while." Guess what the title of Episode 4 is? It's not really just an opinion thing. It is a pattern that they've established in the show. And it makes sense. The shocking last line of the episode in every episode that's had one has been the title of the next episode. Why spoil that in the title of the episode where that line occurs when you can title the next episode that, and that episode actually explores that shocking line? It makes sense. If they have the Angstrom fight in episode 7 and that line goes viral, then the title of the finale is that viral line from the previous episode. It gets way more attention and way more clicks on that episode. It doesn't make sense to title the finale I Thought You Were Stronger if that's the last line of that episode, in my opinion, at least. And also the pattern thing, it's just, I mean, it's kind of not a subjective thing, but whatever. But that brings me to the last counter argument. I've seen a lot of people say they're going to do a cliffhanger with Mark in the alternate dimension to drive up hype for Season 3. And I get it. Cliffhangers are exciting and a good way to get people to want to know more and what happens next. But I think that's pretty discrediting to the writers of Invincible to think they can't come up with a more creative and less cheap way to drive up hype. I also think this would be a terrible and terribly received cliffhanger. We know from the comics how the issue of Mark in the alternate dimension gets resolved. He has some internal conflict, freaks out a little bit, but then after maybe a day or two, he gets rescued by the future Guardians and returns back home. Can you imagine if Season 3 starts with Mark just waiting around in the alternate dimension for a little bit, and then he just gets rescued and returned home right where he left? It will probably be another year at least before we get Season 3. People are already mad at Amazon for the mid-season break, and if they ended Season 2 on a cliffhanger that gets almost immediately resolved without a ton of explanation by characters other than the main character, people would be pissed. And rightfully so, I think. That's not satisfying at all. It would be different if Mark played an active role in any of that rescuing and getting back home. And sure, they could change it up some, but to what degree? Even if they made Mark fight a monster in the other dimension and then he builds his own portal gun somehow, he still has to end up back home within a few days for the story to play out the way it does in the comics, which will ultimately just result in it feeling unsatisfying no matter how it gets back. So to leave that as a cliffhanger when we know what the resolution to that cliffhanger is, it just doesn't make sense for a season in that way, personally. So, in my opinion, there's just not really a good reason to have Angstrom as the finale. And could I be wrong? Absolutely, without a doubt. The writers for the show are amazing. They're incredibly inventive with an already incredible source material to work from. And almost every change they made to the story has been for the better. So they could definitely pull something out of left field that makes even more sense. I also don't think it's impossible for them to find a way to make Mark versus Angstrom work as a finale. And I don't think it's dumb for anyone to believe that will be the case. I just personally believe that Cecil versus Mark will be the finale of Season 2. The last and final point I'll make is that I could see them maybe doing the Cecil fight before they do the Angstrom fight and just change things up a little bit timeline-wise. But I don't really see that happening without big changes that I don't really see them making. But I just want to cover all my bases prediction-wise, just in case that does happen. I can still be like, oh, I'm right. But I guess we will see in just a few weeks. So I hope you all enjoyed this video. If you disagree, please let me know as angrily as possible in the comments. I'm just kidding, but please do let me know. I'm 100% open to discussion and hearing any and all other points you have for or against what I'm saying. And if you're watching this after the season has already finished and you're pointing out how wrong I am about things, shut up. But if I'm right, that's all I've got for today. I will see you guys later. Check out our podcast, The Nerd Authorities, if you like hearing talks about nerd and movie stuff. Yeah, I'll see you guys later. Peace.